I want to thank you. Welcome to the All African People's Revolutionary Party's. Okay, all right. Let's see if I can. Hey, Africans, how you doing? Yeah, just coming on board. Just wanted to make sure everything is working. Can you hear me? All right, that's very good. All right, we got, I guess, a few minutes before we're supposed to start. I guess about 3 or 4 minutes before we're supposed to start. So we are gonna try to wait till other people come on. But anyway, my name is Sobukwe Shukura. I'm a member of the All African People's Revolutionary Party, and we're going to be talking about the question of reparations, and particularly a revolutionary approach to reparations and social and uh, justice. Um my background is again I've been a long time organizer with the All African People's Revolutionary party for over 40 years now, and I'm also I was a journalist. I spent 15, even now, I'm still working on radio. I've worked with the uh, the radio station in Atlanta, particularly WRG, Radio Free Georgia. I did a program called RAP, Revolutionary African Perspectives, for many years. I've had some written journalism since my all the way back to my days in the community college in St. Louis. So that's kind of my background. And I'm just here trying to make sure that we uh, represent today. So I'm gonna, like I said, I'm gonna put up my slides in just a minute, but I hope everybody's here and everybody, can listen to the presentation today. I welcome all of you, and I want to certainly thank the organizers of this conference. I think it's very important that we understand that neocolonialism can only be defeated by a unified effort, effort of Africans who are in the Pan-African sense, not just in one place or on the African continent alone, but it's very important that us Africans play a significant, Africans in the diaspora play a significant role to help to make this process possible. So that's what we're all here for, to make this revolutionary process possible. So with that said, I'm going to go ahead and put up my the slides. Okay. All right. They told me to wait a few minutes, so I will. All right. So I hope everybody's doing fine. Hey, John. All right. Okay, we're going to try to start in a few minutes. As I said, again, as people join, I want to again thank the organizers of this. And as I told you, I'm also a longtime member of the All African People's Revolutionary Party. And this session is dealing with the whole question of reparations and self-determination, and a revolutionary approach to of the question of reparations. In fact, this session is called Power, Justice, and Self-Determination, a Revolutionary Pan-Africanist Approach to Reparations and Restorative Justice. And that's what we want to talk about. We want to talk about reparations in a different way than the notion of just waiting for someone to act on it and give us reparations. So this is pretty much what the presentation will be about. And I'm assuming now maybe I can get started. I'm going to try to put up my slides, and we'll get this party started so we can have more time to interact afterwards. Okay. Can everybody see the slides? Let me make sure that, okay, all right. All right, can everybody see the slides now? Are the slides visible to everybody? Okay, very good. All right. Okay, the whole question of reparations is a very important dialogue that's going on in the African community, not only in the States, but globally. So I want to talk about it in a way that is a little different from just the question of asking. I think that reparations, restorative justice, is not just a question of going and asking for it. So we want to examine this a little bit closer. And these are some of the things that I think that we're dealing with when we just go and ask for reparations. The idea that justice will be achieved by just appealing to the consciousness of the oppressors. That's one fallacy, I think, that comes out of this. And the other one is that we can qualify this wrong that is still going on. And when I say it's still going on, I'm saying that the African continent is still being raped. It's not, it didn't stop being raped. The exploitation of African labor on the continent and in the diaspora is still a very real reality. So in some sense, we're the question of what we, the obvious realities of why we should be calling for reparations or why we deserve reparations, these exploitative realities are really still going on. Africa is still not in control of the majority of its resources. It still is not in control of the mining industry in Africa. It's still not in control of much of its viable land. There are still aspects of settler colonialism and settler capitalism going on the African continent. So we really, in neo-colonial collaboration, which allows for these continued mining resources and land to be exploited and trillions of dollars are leaving the African continent every year. So we can't say that we're kind of like an end and now we want a settlement. So I think that that's a very reality that when we try to assess it, we can't really assess it because it's still going on. It's not like it's ended. It ended with slavery or ended with the dominant neo-colonial struggles that the national liberation struggles that took place in Africa. It still hasn't been settled. And if we use Cabral's definition, national liberation means when we restore our ability to control our national resources, when we are able to restore ourselves to our own independent economic development. And if we can't do that, then we have not achieved even national liberation. So when we start to say that we're looking for reparations, how do we assess what has been going on since the ending of slavery and the dominant ending of traditional colonialism on the continent of Africa? I think it's impossible. And then, and then our analysis has to, which is kind of building on our analysis, has to be based on that we still are under forms of imperialism. We're still dominated by capitalism, which was built again on the theft of land and capitalism, the theft of land and our labor. So those things are still in process. So we see that we still have to assess what are the economic interests. Capitalism and imperialism are based on the continued exploitation of the land and resources and labor of oppressed people. And if it can't, if it operates on that, how do we think that it is going to voluntarily give up its exploitation in the interests of the masses of the people? Because that means that it's basically committing for itself a suicide, a class suicide. So, and I think that the other thing that we want to point out is that the whole question of that Africans and oppressed people in general have to ask permission to exact their own reparations or their own restorative justice. We can organize to liberate our land, to reclaim our resources. This, we don't have to ask the enemies of humanity to do this for us. Just like we didn't, in the early days of the struggle for Pan-Africanism, in the early days in the national liberation struggles, we appealed to the imperialist forces, asking them to do this and do that. But in the final analysis, we only won our national liberation from our own struggles, our own efforts, our own resistance, our own, from everything to our resistance of strikes and so on to the actual armed struggle. And this is what we really are talking about when we're saying that, it's a self-determining process. And when it's a self-determining process, it puts us in a whole nother scenario. We're not asking our enemies to liberate us. We just talked about what is owed and what is still being stolen. I mean, there's a lot of things. I mean, we still see trillions of dollars leaving the continent, and we know that even Britain itself has something like $3 trillion in assets on the African continent. We know the United States and the IMF and World Bank are really exploiting us to the hilt. We know that more than $230 billion is leaving the African continent on an annual basis, and what is coming back, what are they saying that they're giving to Africa, is in aid and loans, and the rest of it is remittance from Africans from abroad. This is what our income is, while we have trillions of dollars in assets on the continent that we are not controlling. So we're also going to discuss the whole question of strategies and tactics for revolutionary reparations and restoration of our own justice on the African continent. And there's no question, that Africans deserve some form of restitution, reparations based on the fact that capitalism was built on our backs, built on hundreds of millions of people's labor, stolen labor through the slave trade. And it's not just the Africans who were captured and enslaved, but it's also the descendants, us, those who were taken and reproduced and in the Western Hemisphere and everywhere else. We, the initial people have grown, over the 500 years of this discourse. So, we also want to be clear, though, as a revolutionary organization, the All African People's Revolutionary Party, is quite clear that reparations and this settler colonialism, it was not just about enslavement of African people, but it's also a relationship between us and the people who were settled in these settler colonial realities and these settler capitalist societies. So when we look at the Western Hemisphere, we have to look at the indigenous peoples. We have a revolutionary responsibility to have a relationship with the indigenous oppressed people in the Western Hemisphere. We see today again that settler colonialism, neocolonialism are still stealing our resources, as I said earlier. So I think it's also important that we don't go the route of these reactionary forces that are like ADOS and others who are trying to convince us that it's this reparations is only owed to people who are in the U.S., but not those. Certainly the Africans on the continent of Africa deserve restitution and reparations also. And we already just mentioned the indigenous people around the world. So so I think we have to be clear that it's not our settler colonialism, settler and capitalism is not separated from a broader struggle, and we have allies who are struggling against the same forces, whether they exist in the Western Hemisphere, on the African continent, and Zionist Israel, and the Pacific Islands, whether it's Australia, New Zealand, or whatever. These are all forces that are suffering under the same oppression, or are also suffering from the settler colonial apparatuses, and now new neo-colonial and settler capitalist regimes. So we've kind of talked about this. One of the progressive reparations movements in the Western Hemisphere coming out of some of the islands, CARICOM, which organizes some of the islands in the Western Hemisphere, Jamaica, Trinidad, and so on, have called for a reparations that does recognize the rights, the indigenous rights of African people. And we think that's at least progressive, but it's not revolutionary. I think we have to look at what the history of settler colonialism really is. When settler colonialism, we're using Zimbabwe as an example. The Europeans took 51% of the land and left the Africans with less than 22% of their own land, and the rest of it they used and assigned to areas for their own, still for their exploitation. And even Africans, so we were left with to try to survive and doing colonialism in Zimbabwe with less than with about 22% of the land that was left for us to try to survive on. And we were the overwhelming majority of the population, the indigenous people were, but yet we were herded on to 22% of our land. And that's an important understanding of how land is so important in the struggle against for a restoration and self-determination of a people. Now, this is what happened with the Zimbabwe land reclamation, which is an example both of how oppressive settler colonialism is, but it's also an example of what a people can do when they're determined to change their condition. In the first phase, and this was the phase that was worked out in the first settlement and agreement between the British. And by the way, this was during the period where there was still armed struggle going on in the southern region of Africa. So there was, there was a lot of compromise being made in the first Lancaster agreement, which didn't was faulty at very best, because even the first government allowed and guaranteed European settlers a place within the government. They allowed Europeans to be part of the government, and there was a decision made in that Lancaster agreement that to change the way indeed land was distributed and land was to have some change and nationalize anything and to really have a more extensive land reform, that the whole government, there had to be a 100% vote from the parliament to be able to change it. So they're pretty much locked in to this willing seller, willing buyer kind of a situation for many years. But if we can see the second phase and the third phase, when there was actually the Africans themselves, the masses of Africans in Zimbabwe, the Africans who had fought, because people weren't fighting for in Southern Africa just for to say that they're independent. They were fighting for their land. They were fighting for their resources. So during that phase, the masses of people and led largely by the veterans who had fought in the war, started occupying vacant lands and resources that were, because some of these European farmers had 2, 3, 4 farms that were not even still in Zimbabwe. Some of them had repatriated to back to Europe, and but they were still controlling land. And these African activists, the masses of the people, were taking and settling on these lands and occupying these lands. Now, the government had 2 choices: either to participate in helping to restore land to the masses of the people, or to turn their guns on the masses of the people. And certainly we can say we applaud ZANU-PF's decision to really reform, to do a massive land reform that resulted in millions of people receiving more land. And we can see in the third, and the fourth phase, that we get down to the fourth phase, and we can see that more than 10 million hectares of land were returned to the African masses in Zimbabwe. So this land reclamation, this restorative justice, this not a self-determination, is a process that is more effective than just simply asking for reparations for African people. But it is a process that is allowing people to, determine themselves how to bring justice to themselves. It's much more effective. I think John in his presentation earlier, John Trimble, and I want to thank him for this slide, and I hope people can see it. Let me see if I can make it any bigger. But it talks about, and he talked about just how much and how effective, and I'll make it big for just a second, I'll bring it back down. But we need to know that European colonizers actually expanded their land and wealth by occupation, by settler colonial process. The small Portugal is able to increase its land by 113% by occupying Angola, Mozambique, Guinea-Bissau, Saint Tome. But this is how United Kingdom, look at it, a small bunch of islands is able to increase its size by 47%. You see so we see all of this land that's being taken over, that allows for the expansion of empire, allows for people to become rich. They're operating on land that doesn't belong to them, but land that allows them to become richer and more advanced by exploiting the land and labor of the African population, African continent. I think one of the things, again, and another example, we gave the example of Zimbabwe, but now we can give the example of Nkrumah and his work in Ghana. One of the things that Nkrumah did was to start to use the resources that were in Ghana, to organize the resources, to nationalize and to industrialize the resources. So not that they weren't just selling raw resources to the West, but they are actually utilizing these resources for their own development, utilizing these resources in a way and sense, from to cocoa to make their own, to rubber trees to make their own tires, to have tire industries, to incorporate the use of the resources for the development of the society. And this is really a key point, because land reclamation is not only the land itself, but it's also the resources in the land and the use of those resources in a way that can industrialize, can be utilized in a way for not just trade of raw resources, but trade of developed products. So this is the kind of restorative justice that a nation can do when it goes through a process of reclamation and industrialization on its own terms. And I think what we have to be cognizant of is that this struggle is not just one where we are protesting and appealing to even international organizations like the United Nations or the International Criminal Court or the African Union. Yes, those are platforms that can be used to express our feelings, our understandings, and our legitimate complaints for reparations, for land reclamation, for the ending of imperialism, and all of these things. We can use these platforms for discussion, but we have to understand that these are reform institutions. They are not revolutionary institutions. We have to understand that the United Nations, it was formed at a time when imperialist forces were using it to settle, to try to negotiate, or at least to settle, to have their grievances settled in a space where they would not have to go to war all the time. But they were not in the initial stages of the United Nations, they certainly were not considering the conditions of African people in general. They were not considering the conditions of the colonized forces. Colonized aspects of the world. Colonization was still going on when the United Nations was formed. It's one of the reasons that in 1948, when the institution decided to petition the Palestine, there was no problem because it was mostly imperialists. They understood the whole occupation and stealing of land. So the United Nations didn't until the 1975 come out when much of the African continent had started to be liberated. They were able to come out and say that Zionism, the ideology behind the occupation of Palestine, or Israel, as some would call it, the occupation of Palestine, was racist and imperialist. It's and Africa was one of the African Union at that time, or the OAU at that time, at least came to say that because they had the experience of Zionist forces that participated in the imperialism inside of Africa, like Israel was giving arms to the South African apartheid regime to kill African men, women, and children, and as they fought for national liberation. So the OAU at that time was quite clear that Zionism was racism and part of the imperialist structures. So I think that we have to understand that the United Nations did not grow out of the national liberation struggles, but it grew out of imperialist forces as a mediating force between those forces that had been fighting. And certainly we know that the International Criminal Court has not brought any serious cases against all the imperialist forces that have been continually aggressing on the masses of people around the world. We don't see anybody being brought in for the invasion or the occupation of Afghanistan or the bombing of Libya or any of those aggressions that have have gone on around the world. When the U.S. Said, that they were going to invade 8 countries, nobody took them to task for going into Syria. Nobody took them to task for going into any of those countries. So the International Criminal Court is another example of which it only seems to want to indict Africans and other people around the world, but seriously, it's not a forum that is formed for the interest of to talk about the aggressions of African from imperialism. And certainly we talked about the African Union. The African Union, which started out as the Organization of African Unity, was really a compromise. It was a compromise between the more radical and revolutionary forces of the Casablanca group, like Ghana, Mali, Egypt, in terms of these forces wanted a unified Africa right of way, wanted to move for a unified Africa, wanted to build an all-African command. But because of the situation at the time when most of the continent was still struggling against national liberation, the compromise was made so that there could be an African Liberation Committee coming out of the African Union. And today, we have to look at that it is not a revolutionary force, but a force that needs to be taken to task for its failure to continue the fight against imperialism. There's nothing in the African Union today, and there's not a committee against neocolonialism. There's not a committee for land reclamation. And if it's going to be an effective force, if it's going to be a an instrument of revolutionary processes for African people, then there has to be that. It has to be a force that that addresses the current stage of neocolonialism and its domination in Africa at this point in time. I think when we look to the institutions that we want to say and to, I guess, to reference when we're talking about having a revolutionary reparations or revolutionary processes on the African continent, we have to look at the revolutionary Pan-African movement institutions like the Fifth Pan-Africanist Congress, which actually called for an end of colonialism and started to organize around this on every level of resistance, using all tools necessary from, like I said earlier, strikes, boycotts to armed struggle. These institutions were clear that they wanted to an end to imperialism, and that's what led to the after the first Pan-African conference on the continent, the All African People's Revolution, the All African People's Conference that took place in 1958. And this is where people actually were talking and strategizing on how to take liberation for themselves, not to ask for it anymore, not to simply request it from their imperialists, but to show the imperialism that they were willing to make whatever sacrifices needed to gain their liberation. So we can see that the All African People's Meetings and the handbook and later after that of those many meetings, we can see other manifestations of this. We talked about the All African People's Revolution, People's Conference in 1958. And then we can talk about the Pan-African Women's Conference that took place in 1962, where women came together from across the continent to unite in a struggle against imperialism and neocolonialism. And then in 1968, the writing of a handbook of revolutionary warfare by Kwame Nkrumah, where he outlined bringing all of the revolutionary forces together, the liberation forces together, and to talk about how to strategize on building a all African People's Committee for Political Coordination, meaning to bring together at that time the forces that were fighting in Angola, the forces that were fighting in Southern Africa, all the liberation forces around the continent together, and sense of building a force that could reckon with ending imperialism once and for all. And that's still one of the biggest tools in terms of studying the Handbook of Revolutionary Warfare, in terms of understanding where we need to go and how we need to move if we want to continue this whole process of restoring power to the people, land reclamation, and restoring ourselves and bringing reparations really to ourselves in that sense. I think I'm going to make this a little bigger. I think we have to talk about this, and it's very important, the tools that we need to for self-determination. And those tools are, we need organization. And organization is it presupposes unity. People always want to talk about unity, but you can't be unified if you're not organized. It's a prerequisite for unity. So when we look at we look at some ways in which we think that can happen. One, joining the All African People's Revolutionary Party, of course, or a Pan-African Socialist Party working to fulfill Nkrumah's call in the Handbook of Revolutionary Warfare. It's a very important aspect or tool or weapon. Joining a worldwide, the worldwide Pan-African movement founded in South Africa, and is a movement bringing together Pan-African organizations and organizations who are against neocolonialism. It's also another way to get involved. But we wanted, again, joining with Pan-African reparations organizations with self-restorative positive action campaigns, organizing with Pan-African political parties, indigenous rights organizations, Pan-African youth organization, women's and workers organizations. And I want to be clear. See, some people will, if they examine struggles, they won't be able to determine the difference between a tactic and really the strategy and the struggle for how to change the situation. The struggle of something like the boycott, sanctions, and divestitures movement during the apartheid years in Southern Africa, and even today, the same movement, the BDS movement, and against and that is being waged by the Palestinians against the apartheid. These are tactics. This is not the actual strategy and the process of liberation. In Southern Africa, the only way liberation can happen is an end to settler colonialism, and today an end to settler capitalism. That is what the people are really fighting for. They might have used apartheid as a tactic to bring broad support for their movement, but it is not the end result. If you don't end settler colonialism and settler capitalism in Southern Africa and neocolonialism today, you will not be liberated. And the same thing is in the situation in Zionism and Palestine. The struggle is not BDS is only a tactic. The real struggle is for land reclamation, the restoring of the land to the masses of the people. And we know that we have to be able to determine in our movement, even in the struggle for reparations can only be a tactic. We're not just struggling to get money back. We have to be struggling on the continent to end imperialism. And when we're in the diaspora, we have to be struggling to end capitalism. And we might use the struggle, a tactic, something like struggling for reparations. But if that struggle for reparations is not tied to the ending of capitalism, we will still be in the same shape as we were before. So I think it's very important, again, to understand reparations as a tactic that has to be tied to a real revolutionary solution for the masses of our people. And certainly we can talk about all kinds of tactics, from strikes. We talked about the BDS movements, mass demonstrations, and even electoral politics. And some can be a weapon if we are organized to do it. Petitions, all of the things are tactics, but to be used in terms of our ultimate goal as revolutionaries. So I think that this is some of the things that the AAPRP has put out there in terms of, we talked about a positive action campaign in terms of Africa, and one of those is this whole question. We devised this petition, and one of the things was that we were asking for, one, land reclamation is one of the most important aspects of our struggle. Land reclamation, the return of our land and resources. Africa's debt, we don't feel like we owe the debt. Africa is the that's part of the question of reparations. We shouldn't be paying a debt that we don't owe. The imperialists took those resources, are still taking those resources. We can't in any way in shape and form justify that we have a debt to them when they really have a debt to us. So we should cancel those debts. We should say that we're not paying those debts. We should refuse to pay those debts. And we think that certainly part of the restoration is that Africans all over the world have a right to citizenship in Africa. And we need to tear down these imperialist colonial borders that have been imposed on us. This is part of our struggle to restore ourselves, to give ourselves a reparations. And finally, this whole question of foreign military bases operating on the continent of Africa. That's totally contrary to the advancement of our struggle for self-determination. What other nations, major nations in the world, like Russia or the Russian Federation or China, would allow foreign bases like the U.S. on their soil, or France or Britain to have bases on their soil? This is a direct hangover from colonialism itself. It is part of the neo-colonial reality. So with that, I'm going to stop here, and we're going to continue on with our discussion. All right. All right. All right. Okay. Brother said that he also believes that the handbook is a very powerful tool, but he strongly believes that I guess we have to look at it in today's eyes. Let me see if I can go back up to this question. Let me see if I can find it. Yeah, I think definitely we think that only, certainly that only the question of sovereignty and having our own control of us, can we really look at reparations in a very realistic light? Because what happens when you're in a capitalist and imperialist system, even if you receive some capital, it's just like how capitalism works in the workforce. When we put enough pressure on them, they may even increase our wages. But what happens after that? They also increase the question of what everything costs. They increase prices. So if you have the power, if you have if the means of production are in the hands of a few, like right now, we know that 43% of the total economic wealth of the world is controlled by less than 0.0001% of the population. And certainly if those people control the majority of the wealth, they certainly we are certainly not going to be able to without changing that situation, which certainly are not going to change the wealth gap in the world. The wealth gap between the very, very, very rich and the very, very poor. And since 2014, on the African continent alone, we've been the whole question of growing what is called extreme poor on the continent of Africa has increased by another almost 60-something million people. I believe that the total now is 282 million people who live on less than 200, what we call 200 shillings, which is really less than $2 a day on the African continent. So the wealth gap and the poverty on the African continent is actually increasing. Yeah, I agree. Certainly the struggle, the question of reparations is, as I've been pointing out the whole time, is it can't be separated from the struggle for the unification of African continent. Okay, and certainly our brothers, Dr. Jemay Ndogo Faye has said that he'll be expounding on that. We look forward to hopefully participating in that one. And certainly, this whole, certainly it's important and imperative to understand that, like Nkrumah was really Ghana under Nkrumah and under the CPP was the really the first real Pan-African government that we had on the African continent. I mean, the concept of Pan-Africanism was played out in the everyday organization of the government of Ghana. The whole notion of inviting Africans from the diaspora and everywhere else on the continent to participate in the revolution and the national liberation struggle and the building of a revolutionary society in Ghana. I mean, he brought in Africans from the U.S., from the Caribbean. He brought in Africans from other places on the African continent to participate in this, and the youth programs and the young pioneers. He was very much understanding that Pan-Africanism, to make it real, that you had to use your imagination to understand that the revolutionary process had to be be borderless, to respect this notion of borders in the way that imperialism had imposed them on us. And I think that's a critical understanding. And Sekou Touré himself also was very aware of this. And he said that, when people were fighting for border expansion, his neighbors trying to benefit from what they thought resources might be across the border or whatever, he said, we are not going to engage in that. We're not going to have border wars with the countries around us, because we understand that this wealth should be shared by all of us. And certainly, to me, ending the question of neocolonialism is about ending capitalism and white supremacy. It's part of it, because part of when we think about the whole question of settler occupation, when we think about it is the prerequisite. Neocolonialism settler colonialism gave birth to capitalism, and because it was the land and the labor exploitation that gave, and that land was stolen under the premises of white superiority, of some kind of white man's burden, white man's right to take land from indigenous people. So certainly all these things are certainly tied together. And we thank Dr. James for her intervention on that one. And certainly, I think that, even though we didn't express it in that sense, but certainly the question of it is a revolution. We have to have revolutionary ideology. If we're going to have a form of reparations, that again, if it's not tied to revolutionary ideology, it's going to be just another reform at best. And reform never leads to permanent change. It only leads to being more comfortable for a minute within the context of the struggle. But ultimately, after that period, or usually that period, we can attest. I was born in the U.S. Now I'm living in Kenya, but I was born in the U.S. I've seen countless times we struggle for housing, we struggle for medical care, we struggle for different things, and at different points in history, we struggle for the vote, we struggle for but ultimately, we see that we've never actually won these struggles. We advanced these struggles, but we never actually won these struggles. We're still talking about the voting rights bill, even today, some 30, 40 years after the voting rights bills have been passed, because ultimately capitalism still is going to undermine the masses of the people's ability to change the system. And that means that they must control the vote. They must sabotage the vote. Yeah, and it's been pointed out certainly that neocolonialism can only end at the bringing of socialism. Certainly it takes socialists to build socialism. That's why, as I said in another one of the forums, that this is really a battle of ideas. It's part of the revolutionary process is to battle over the propaganda, to battle through propaganda, through the struggling over making sure that we understand the ideas that are being they're propagating to ourselves. That the enemy is propagating to us, and to understand, to come to study for ourselves, to learn for ourselves, as Malcolm would say, to think for ourselves, and not just accept what is given to us. And this is part of the revolutionary process. The revolutionary process starts with conception. I think Kwame Ture was infinitely. He used to repeat all the time that this notion that power begins with conception, what you can understand, what you can know, and he got that from the Leap movement when they said that if you don't power without a conception, without the understanding without the understanding, there's no power at all. That's why it's not just we talk about the working class and the oppressed sectors. Without without knowledge, without understanding, it doesn't make them powerful. It's not like we become revolutionaries just because we are oppressed. We become revolutionaries because we understand the ideas that oppress us, and the ideas, and we have ideas on how to end that oppression. That's the only way we can end it. Amilcar Cabral once was famous for saying that basically that he knows that that revolutions that have even a correct ideology can fail. But he went on to say that there is no nowhere in history that we saw a successful revolution without a revolutionary ideology. So revolutionary ideology is of utmost importance in understanding our movements. So we have to understand when we don't have an ideology, that expresses a struggle for power, then we don't have a revolutionary ideology. At best, we can have a progressive movement, reformist movement, but without an understanding of that we want power and we want to transform the society, we can never have a revolutionary society. We can never overturn the forces that are dominant against us. Without the overthrowing of capitalism, without the overthrowing of imperialism, we certainly cannot have a revolutionary society. And we cannot have the change that we really seek. So I don't know if we have any more questions or any more ideas that people want to express. Yeah, I think that and this is important. I think it's Dejan. Certainly, we can have regression. In fact, the enemy will come and take over progressive ideas or reformist ideas. And I think that as we, in this panel or in this session where we're talking about reparations, and I think I mentioned this whole thing about ADAS is it's being pushed by forces to the right, forces that see this as an instrument of taking what they conceived as a nationalist movement and allowing it to aid the right forces within power. The forces of capitalism and imperialism to take reparations and to take it into it's the same way we can go the same way that they approach Black Power. Black Power was ended up being divided up between those to the left and those to the right. Those to the right talked about Black capitalism, that the Black Power was talking about Black capitalism, that Africans just wanted to be a part of the struggle for capitalism, and as they just wanted the door to be open up to them. They wanted to participate in Black capitalism, and indirectly that meant that they wanted to also participate in the imperialism and the oppression of others that capitalism and imperialism was oppressing. And on the left, we were obviously moving toward the understanding that the struggle, and without the destruction of capitalism, without the destruction of imperialism, without the building of socialism, that we would that our struggle would not be emancipatory. I mean, it was clear that those on the left, they moved to understand that Black Power was tied to the anti-imperialist struggle around the globe. The struggle, those in SNCC and those organizations and Black Panthers and the other organizations that came to understand that they had to be against the struggle and the invasion of the occupation and invasion of Vietnam, had to be against the invasion and occupation of Palestine. They had to be against all of the struggles that were going on at the time. They had to even support the Irish Republican Army and their right to Ireland and against British colonization. So yes, obviously, our movements without a revolutionary conception of where we're going will end up in the hands and easily be swayed by the forces to the right. I mean, that's why you see some of these forces pumping money into NGOs and organizations, even money coming from right forces into forces, even legitimate struggles like the Black Lives Matter movement and those kinds of things. money coming from the right to try to dampen it and to move it from moving to the left. This is just part of the process. Yeah. And I think it's being pointed out here that, and it's, that socialism itself is not even can't be separated from an international struggle, a struggle for a broader sense of communism, moving to understand that we're not just struggling in our silos for a socialist, the kind of just a socialist nation, because no socialist nation can even survive unless imperialism is destroyed. And if imperialism is not destroyed, we're still not really free, even as we move towards socialism. We can see how much the socialist camp can be isolated and used, attacked if there is not a greater unity among internationalist forces. We can see how if it were for solidarity with Cuba and solidarity with Venezuela and such, that these they would not have survived. It's important for us to understand that we're all facing a struggle against imperialism. So, all right. All right. Okay. I think. I think. Okay. I think everybody has. No. In a sense, I think there's a question here. The proletariat, who is a communist, does not need to commit class suicide. Now, it's only when the proletariat is conscious. Now, they don't have to commit class suicide in the sense that the petty bourgeoisie does, and because they are a privileged class, or they have to commit it. Certainly, the working class is not in a privileged situation, but sides in the peripheral of certainly the working class in places in more developed, oppressive societies like the West certainly don't have a different relationship to capitalism than those who are in the peripheral, those who are in the who are in Africa and Asia and places where they are neocolonialism. They are being under neocolonialism. That the classes are different, but there is the workers have to come to a revolutionary consciousness. They're not revolutionary simply because they're workers. They are the oppressed, and they have the potential power to overturn the oppressive systems, but they're certainly not revolutionary simply because they're the working class. They are the force. They are the productive forces, and with consciousness, they can help to overturn capitalism. It's just like we were saying, even with Africans, we are not revolutionary just because we have been exploited to build capitalism. We become revolutionary when we have revolutionary consciousness, when we have a revolutionary ideology, when we understand that our movements, even of resistance, can only bear fruit when we understand that we are struggling for revolution, that we're struggling and consciously want power and not simply just reform. This is, I think that this is a question that has to be continually struggled over. The notion certainly is that class suicide, from our understanding, is that the workers are not committing class suicide in the same way that the petty bourgeoisie is, but they do have to have a revolutionary consciousness to be successful. Without a revolutionary consciousness, they can even be moved to a right and against their own interests. To have revolution, you must have revolutionary ideology. And the ultimate revolution, the communist revolution that we seek to develop, is an end of classes altogether. So we want to move towards a classless society, meaning that we even though we might fight first for a socialist state that is dominated and controlled by the masses, the workers, the people who produce. Eventually, to move to the communist stage, we have to even move to the higher level of understanding that we want to end all classes. All right. So I'm not sure how we're running on time. What time is the next session supposed to start? All right. Okay, I think we might be running over a little bit. Are we? All right. All right. I'll end it in the next 6 minutes. So, are there any other questions or anything else? Before we end, is there anything else we need to clarify? All right. Okay, it looks like we're out of. All right, Africans. Thank you for all of you for your participation. I think I'm going to end it here, and we're going to let you get ready and maybe take a break before the next session. But I appreciate everybody's input and everybody's participation, and hopefully you'll enjoy the rest of the conference. And again, I thank the organizers of the conference once more, and all the participants, and all of you stay strong. Forward ever, backward never. And if you're not in an organization, join an organization working for your people. If you are in an organization, try to do what this conference is trying to do, bring more of us together so that we can better fight our struggle against these imperialist forces and capitalist forces. And we can build a revolutionary socialist world and a one unified socialist Africa. Forward ever, backward never.